Get a sip of my McDonald's coffee. I like the dirty coffee. Episode 2. In this episode, we're going to talk about bass and hopefully get to a little bit of guitars. But I want to set up kind of again, some more reasons why we make the decisions that we make. Particular with bass, which we'll get into in just a second here, but I want to kind of set an idea before you. Let's say that there's a 600-member congregation in a church, just some random number. It makes no difference if there's 20 people or 6,000. Let's say there's 500 people in a congregation, and there's one worship team, and it's a normal Sunday morning, and you got a band going, and that band's job is to lead worship for the rest of the 500 people in that congregation. Now, we don't ask those 500 people every week to bring guitars and basses and drum sets and pianos and violins, and there might be a couple people that bring a tambourine. You do the math on that. I don't know. But you get the point. We are asking those 500 people to sing with us. The band, the instruments, set the atmosphere and the tone. They give you the tempo of the song. They give you the mood of the song. They give you the lyrics of the song. They give you the melody of the song, and in some cases, harmony. That band sets the stage for the rest of the people in the congregation to do what? Play guitars? No, sing. We're asking people to sing. I don't know why, but God likes us to sing. We've been doing it for thousands of years. As God's people, He has ordained and set before us a form of worship called singing. Now, is there instruments in the Bible? Of course there is. That's why we use instruments now. He invented the concept of music. But in this situation, we are asking 500 people to sing with us. So that makes the top of that priority list is singing. So the rest of the band, the drum kit, the bass player, the guitar players, the piano player, you name it, any other part of that band that is not vocals is just there to set up vocals. They are vitally important, but they are not the priority. What I'm trying to say is, as we mix bass today, as we edit bass today, as we go through the priorities and what we're trying to do is we're trying to set a tone for people to sing to. We're trying to create an atmosphere for people to sing. If you're a bass player and your goal is to play cool bass licks, we've lost it. The highest priority in that room on a Sunday morning is people singing together. And so the band sets the tone for the vocals. That's just the priority in worship. In other genres, it could be set up different, but that's what we're mixing today. And so my goal is not to just dumb down everything so that the vocals are clearly on top. I love creativity. I love musicianship. I am not trying to cap people's creativity, but there is a place for everything. That's why we don't have guitar solos throughout the entire song while the lyrics are going on. That's why we don't have a drum solo the whole time. There are times for creativity and for it to weave in and out, but for the most part, we want to set the tone and not be distracting to any other parts of the music or for the rest of the congregation. I hope that makes sense to you as we dive into bass here. Let's look at the original bass track first. I'm going to pull that up. This is all raw tracks, no processing. Original drums, there are 2 electric guitars, there are 3 vocalists, 1 melody, lead singer, and 2 harmonies. There's bass, and there's a click track. Here's the original, raw, unmixed, untouched tracks.
Praise the hallelujah.
Let me solo out bass for you since that's what we're going to be starting on today. So in my opinion, that bass is too busy for the rest of the song.
Presence of my enemies.
Let me take out lead vocals here. So you already have a guitar that's really rhythmic. And you have drums that are super simple, just basically on the 2 and 4. 1, boo, 3, 2. And so that bass line with the octaves and the rhythm pattern is, in my opinion, taking away from the rest of it. There's a lead vocal that comes in right there, and there's a guitar, and the drums are keeping very simple rhythm and just kind of setting the tone for the song to start. So that bass, I chose to replace that bass. Let me show you what we replaced it with. Okay, so here's the mixed track all together. So, original bass, like I showed you in the untouched version, and I have replaced it with a more simple, consistent bass that goes with that 2 and 4 of the drums. And here's what that sounds like, the replaced bass. I will show you that in context with the drum set. Let me add electric guitar. Here comes bass. So in the song, the original bass just seemed way too busy for the tone that we're trying to set up front. The more intricate rhythmic elements that are added at the same time on top of each other, the harder it is to sync up later, and the harder it is to, especially when there's not a lot of pre-production going into these worship sets every week, the harder it is to get those to marry each other and to sync up just right and to sound just right and to feel like they belong to each other. We just felt like the bass was a little bit too busy for this track, and for that reason, we chose to replace it with something simple. This is not, again, to dumb down somebody's creativity, but it all has to do with the priority of the song. The song is always king. Each individual part serves the greater purpose of the song. If individual parts start to get focused on themselves, trying to do the coolest part that they can, or trying to really make the song more interesting by themselves, it starts to getting convoluted, it starts to get muddy, and it's hard to fix afterwards when we're not playing off of each other and just adding what is needed and nothing more. Let's go through the bass editing process. Let's jump back and go through the bass editing process. So in a normal situation, let me pull up this bass track. Now I use a DAW called Cubase, but this process, every DAW has some version of audio editing, of audio warping, correcting, or manipulating audio. If I double click this, I have a couple tabs here on the left, and one of them is called Audio Warp, and I go into Free Warp, and that gives me these tabs also onto a grid. So I can take, if I erase this tab, we can see that originally that bass, it was a little bit before the grid. That's not too bad. But if I click right here, right before what we call the transient, which is the first kind of wave peak of that sound, it gives me a warp point or a hit point, and I can now drag that to the grid. And basically, I am going through this entire bass line and dragging each note to the grid. Let's spend a second just talking about this. Timing is everything. If I'm playing an acoustic guitar and one of my strings is a little bit flat as I'm transitioning from chord to chord, if I'm a little bit flat as a singer, if I accidentally hit the wrong note inside a 5-note chord on a piano, most of the time, people aren't going to trip on that. What people do notice is timing mistakes. If there are 5 instruments on the stage and none of those are synced up and they're having a hard time getting on the right timing, people notice that right away. Editing in general, tuning and timing make the biggest difference in a mix. That alone makes your band seem, it separates your band from seeming polished to amateur. That alone. If you can get your editing to where timing and tuning are right, that is the majority of your mix. That is half, if not more, of your mix. That is why we track the click, and then we sync the click up to a specific tempo on our grid inside of our DAW. So now if I hit my bass track, if I play my bass track, we can hear, and I'll add my metronome here. We can hear it's in perfect time with the click. Another thing that I want to emphasize, in particular with bass, is that bass is the instrument in the track that is the most attached to drums without being a percussion instrument. So the bass, in particular, the bass guitar, the bass track, is most connected to the kick drum on the drum kit. And so let me play this chorus for you, and we'll listen to what the kick drum is doing. So we can hear the kick drum on its, the pattern of the kick drum is doom, bump, bump, dump, dump, dump. So what is really, really important for bass in those sections is to pay attention to that kick pattern for a couple different reasons. One, they're both kind of almost taking up the same EQ real estate. So if they're not playing off of each other, syncing up, doing the same things almost at a lot of different times, then it's going to start sounding muddy really, really quick because they are both big, fat, low-end instruments. So a lot of times what we have our bass player do, or what the suggestion is anyway, is to link up with that kick pattern. Listen to what the drummer has chosen to do in that section, stay consistent, and link up with that kick pattern. So if the kick is 1, 2, 3, 4, kick, 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 then that bass more than likely will sound its best if it's complementing that kick pattern. Boom, bump, boom, dum, bump, bum. And so that's what the bass is doing in this section. I'll play it just the bass for you. I'll play bass and drums together. The original bass pattern in that same section, here's how it sounded and why we replaced it. I'll show you how the original bass and the drums sounded together. So you can hear how it starts to get just a little bit kind of confusing down there as to who's doing what and what's complementing each other. And the other one is just much more confident and consistent sounding. Again, here's the new one in context with the entire song, the bass replacement. Okay, so let's go over how the bass is mixed. Low end in a mix is the hardest to get right. let me show you what I've put on my bass track. These are specific plugins that I use. If you have them, great. If not, the concepts are what's important over the actual plugin. Auto-tune. I put auto-tune on bass for this reason. One, the auto-tune that I use actually has a bass instrument setting, so it pays more attention to those big, giant, low-end waves that are down there. I tune it pretty heavy. The retune speed is at 10. The flex tune, which is kind of compensating for how hard stuff tunes. If you tune stuff really, really hard, you start getting that Cher T-Pain effect. And flex tune kind of buffers out a little bit right where the note switches into the next one. You don't get that hard auto-tune feel switch. This kind of makes that switch a little bit softer. But I definitely have it on the key that we're on, the key of B in a major scale, and it's set to bass instrument. And the reason why I do that is because it is one note on a bass, usually one note at a time, getting played out that takes up so much room on the EQ. So it's taking up half of this EQ, and it's really peaking right around that 59, 60 hertz range. It takes up a lot of space. If the bass is off, it's very easy for it to start to sound weird. And so you can't hear the auto-tune on it. I'll bypass it. I'll put it back on. You can't really hear the auto-tune on it. It's not doing anything except for keeping maybe some bends, or if there's a little bit of intonation problems in that bass instrument, it's just kind of reeling it back in. And to me, that's super important to have a pure solid low end. It takes up so much space in a mix that I want that to be as pure as it can. The second thing I put on it, as I go straight from tuning into a DBX, now this is outboard gear. I have a DBX 160A, and that is hitting the bass pretty hard. So that's hitting the bass and compressing really, really hard. There are other plugins that I could use for that. Bass is something that, if you notice, the lesser skilled players and the not as well made bass instruments will have a tendency to be very uneven up and down the scale and up and down the neck of that bass. You'll hit one note and it'll be very loud, very prominent, very pure. And then as you walk up a couple frets, the next note you hit will be at a way lower volume, and you're always, not always, but in a lot of cases, you're trying to compensate for that bass, and you need that to be consistent. Everywhere the bass is in, it needs to stay consistent and really needs to hold its own spot right there in the mix. And so compression is key for a bass instrument. The next thing that I have is this. Now, there's a lot of plugins that people use, like Waves has a version. I think it's R-Bass, but I use a plugin from Universal Audio called Little Labs Voice of God. And basically you pick out the frequency that you kind of want to enhance, the sub frequency, and then you dial it in, you dial the amplitude in to where you want it. And I'll show you the difference that it makes inside the bass instrument track. Here's without it. And here's with it. Without it. And here's with it. So it really brings that subby low end out, which in this genre, super important to my ears. I'll put it in context of the entire song. That's how I have it mixed right now. I'll take off all of the inserts that I have in and replay the song. Now I'll put them back in. Take it back out and back in. Okay, so the last thing I want to address is the EQ that I have on bass. That's kind of going to be different depending on the bass, how they, what they have their tone knobs set to on their bass instrument. If you're miking an amp, if you're what kind of DI, what kind of bass it is, how they play it. So the EQ is going to all be different. On this particular overdub, I'll go back a little ways and I'll show you kind of why I made the choices that I'm making on EQ. You can hear every time a note is plucked, you get that string noise, you get that pluck noise, and that is why I took it down 10 dB right at about 3500, because I can see on my RTA that right when that pluck is hitting, that's where it's happening right there. And so I'm trying to just get a little bit of that out. You can see it happening right in there. That's part of the bass instrument. I don't necessarily want it gone, but I do want it reduced a little bit. I took a little bit out of 200. If I sweep through the frequencies, I can and this is a really good technique for really anything, particular acoustic guitar, bass, really anything that you're trying to like make it less harsh. Take out the bad stuff. Do a sweep as it's playing. Listen for the frequencies that aren't very pleasing and take those out. I like that in there. I don't want to keep that. I want to keep that. That's where it starts sounding bad to me, right in there. So if I take that out, the bass gets a lot more smooth, a lot more milky to me, a lot more kind of pleasing to listen to. That's different, like I said, in every song, but that's the EQ choices that I've chosen to make on bass. That's going to be it today. We'll do the next one because there's a lot to go through with electric guitars. There's 2 electric guitars on this song, and I'll do another video in the future that deals with acoustic guitars. So we do a lot of acoustic guitars in our sets, and I'm sure you guys do too. But I hope this helped. I hope you got something out of it. I'm going to continue making these videos, hopefully on a weekly basis, and we'll just continue working through this set. Episode 3 will be electric guitars. Don't forget to tune in, subscribe so you get the notifications, like the videos, and we'll see you guys next time.